Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Miracles of Tragedy. I'm Colin Hughes, your host, and so excited to have with us today a lady who has just been is very well known over in the UK for the things that she's done. We'll get into all of that when we get into the conversation, but I'm so happy to have Pam Warren with me today. Pam, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us.
That's a pleasure, Colin, and thank you for reaching out and asking me.
Well, so UK, you say you haven't been to when we talked earlier, you said you have not been to the United States. You just haven't given talks here in the United States.
I haven't given any talks in the United States. I've been to the United States quite often.
Okay.
Um, I've got family in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. I live in Las Vegas, so not far from there at all.
Ah,
So,
yeah. And I
and
think I've also got a branch somewhere in San Francisco.
now, what part of the UK are you in?
Right. Well, I recently moved. I was living quite near London.
Hmm.
Um, and then about 2 years ago, I decided that London area was getting too hectic and busy, and I didn't like everyone's into money, money, money. So I relocated, and I'm now in the mountains of North Wales. So that's
Oh,
where I situate myself now, and it's very pretty up here.
that's what I've heard. I've never been to the UK. I have a dear, dear friend. I've had a friend of mine for several years who's from Scotland.
Uh-huh.
As a matter of fact, he is a decorated war hero
Oh,
in
really?
the Royal Army. Yes, he was actually awarded the Military Cross.
Wow.
Yeah, which, as you know, is given. Well, now it would be the king, but he is given only by the royal family, and he was awarded this by the queen herself while she was still
Oh,
alive. Yeah,
oh, brilliant. Yeah, very
yeah, I,
impressive.
yeah. I did an interview with him a while back. He he was out on patrol, and they came under attack. He's left-handed, and he was shot directly in his left shoulder. Couldn't even move his arm,
Uh-huh.
and he literally single-handedly stopped the attack. He with one hand, he put
This
down his
is
gun, and with
ringing a
one
bell.
fist,
What's his
with
name?
one fist, he did this. I just if you get a chance, if you'd like to listen to the episode. This is Darren Dixon, war
Darren
hero.
Dixon. Right, yeah. I'm pretty sure actually, because I recognise the sort of that little story, his
Uh huh.
backstory. But maybe because he's slightly older than me, or a bit older than me, then maybe that's why he's not always in my consciousness. But wow, that is really impressive because the Military Cross doesn't get given out very often.
No, no, he was. I'm not sure how old he is. He's late 30s, early 40s.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
sorry, maybe
this was in Afghanistan. This
Afghanistan.
occurred.
Oh, right. Do excuse
Yes.
me. Have a sip of water.
Yeah, as you said with our conversation beforehand, the Scots are known for fighting,
I
or
did
how
not.
was it you put it?
I said they are known for their combative nature.
Well, Darren sure proved it on that day that he was in this that he was there. So now you have a very interesting story. A lot of people that I talk to on here, it's their tragedies that they have been through, where the loss of a loved one through suicide or what have you, or cancer. Usually younger people, husband, child, grandchild, but your tragic moment was very different.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where you're just getting on with your life,
Hmm.
and all of a sudden outside influences completely tear all that up and chuck it in the bin for you. So I'm very sorry about my British expressions. I know the Americans find them quite amusing. Um, but yeah, I was in a train crash. So I was commuting one day into London, and my train, which was a high speed train, was going into London, and it hit head on with a train coming out of London on the same piece of track. They crashed head on at over 130 miles an hour. And the carriage I was in was behind the engine. And at that time, the fuel tanks exploded. So a fireball ripped through the carriage I was on. And unfortunately, 31 people did die. And I was supposed to be the 32nd victim because I was badly burnt. I actually lost, from my top lip upwards, I lost my face. I've got grafted hands because all my hands got burnt, got burns all over my legs, etc. But I was so badly injured, I ended up in a coma for 3 weeks. I was in hospital a lot longer, and it took me a good 2 years to get over the physical injuries. But I also now get post-traumatic stress disorder from what happened.
Sure.
That took me 10 years to get to grips with. So it really did. All the life I'd built up until that point was gone. In that minute, you know, a few seconds, it was totally gone.
What I read about the crash is, like you said, 130 miles an hour combined. So about, 65 miles an hour each coming head on, or 220 some kilometers per hour. And there was 540 people total.
Yeah, I mean, the passenger numbers have always been not guessed at, but nobody's 100% sure how many in total.
Right.
However, I tend to, when you think about the length of the trains, and it was rush hour, so it was commuter trains, both of them. Yeah, that would be roughly the figure, over 500 people.
So
luckily, most of them walked away, but
right, 31 deaths and 417 injured, correct?
Yes, with varying states of injury. But I've always said, actually, it affected everyone that was involved. Simply because the people that weren't injured, they had to witness it all. So they witnessed dead people, they witnessed bits of people lying on the track, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, it wasn't. I mean, even now, after all these years, because it was 23 years ago now. Even now, it sort of sends a shiver down my spine every time.
Yeah, the emotional scars, that's an injury to me. If you look at it holistically, that the trauma, trauma can be emotional as well as physical.
Yes, and again, I mean, it's something that I talk about when I'm talking, is particularly when I'm talking to train companies, because sometimes I'm called in to talk to train drivers about why their jobs are so important. And I say to them, it's not just about the passengers on your train. When something like, that happened to us happens again, or God forbid it never does, but for each passenger, that passenger's got family members, and those family members, or that person also has friends. So it's almost like that ripple effect. It sort of spirals out, and every single person is emotionally affected by that one person that might be involved in whatever the incident is. Which is why I get them to think about, they're not just carrying 400 odd people, they're probably carrying responsibility for 14,000 people when you take those others into account.
And what you said just a moment ago of seeing the things that were there, I didn't even think of that before we started talking, that that would be part of the survivors, what they would actually see. That's like being in a war zone.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, when I was taken away from the track side up to the ambulance, the ambulances couldn't get down to where the train crash had happened. So we had to be hoisted up, because there was a steep embankment. So we were hoisted up on a chair. And I was still, at that time, I was still conscious. And I was looking out over the top of the train crash. So I could see people that weren't,
Oh,
yeah. But I remember then my brain just going, ignore it, Pam. You can't cope with that on top of everything else. So I actually consciously made the decision not to take it on board at that time.
yeah. It just I can't imagine seeing anything like that.
It was horrific. It was horrific.
I cannot stand the sight of blood, especially if it's my own. But and I this you'll find a little strange.
Go on.
So I've recently been diagnosed diabetic back in
Oh,
June of last year. And I always
uh-huh.
told myself I could never ever I had an uncle when I was growing up. I had an uncle who was diabetic and I'd watch him give himself injections. I'd always have to turn the other way. I couldn't look. I always told myself I could never do that.
Right.
When
But you did.
I when I'm watching a hospital movie or a television show and they give an injection, I got to turn my head. But now every day, 4 or 5 times a day, I'm injecting myself.
Yeah. It's amazing what your body will get used to given
Yeah,
enough time.
or your
And
head, your mind too, because that was
yeah,
all my mind really. So it's
yeah.
now. How long were you in the hospital?
I was in the hospital for about, it was just over 3 months.
Wow.
Um, but they didn't want me to, I discharged myself because I was getting fed up. I actually felt like I was becoming institutionalized, and my brain was beginning to convince myself that I would never see my home again. So I did speak to my surgeon and said to him, well, can I go home? And he was going, well, we still got a lot of operations to carry out. And I said, well, could I come back as an outpatient rather than an inpatient? And he said, well, if you promise to do this, that, and the other, and they sent me home with stacks of morphine and um, um, but so yes, I got out after 3 and a bit months, and even to this day now, I avoid hospitals like plague. I've got a thing against them.
Do you still have any pain from your injuries?
Yes, unfortunately, from the fireball that I got hit by, it boiled all the synovial fluid in my joints. So I've got the joints of an 80-year-old. So I get arthritis quite very badly. Uh,
Oh,
but yeah, well, you sort of learn to cope with it. And I mean, I'm one of these people that, particularly when it comes to exercise, I need to be nagged into exercising. But I have found that my arthritis is better the fitter I am, because obviously my muscles are then supporting the joints that are painful. So it does help me keep a bit fitter than I would do normally, because I do enjoy my chocolates and my cakes as well.
oh, I know the feeling. And now that I'm
Oh, I'm sorry, I should
diabetic,
say that to a diabetic. It's very unfair of me. I'm so sorry.
yeah, when I was diagnosed, was just the week the week after I got back from my granddaughter's funeral when she ended her own life back in June.
Mm.
I This is one of the reasons the title of my podcast, The Miracles of Tragedy, is I got back and one morning I told my wife, says, I need to go to the emergency room. She says, why? I says, I just need to go, honey. So trust me. Well, what's wrong? And I thought to myself, you know, if I say I have chest pains, they'll get me in right away. I said, well, I got
Right.
this little pain in my chest. And all it was is, um, indigestion that I get every now and then.
Uh-huh.
'Cause I had that for years. And she says, was it that bad? I says, honey, please just take me to the emergency room. And all the way there, I'm thinking, why am I going to the hospital? There's nothing wrong with me. My glucose level was 800. And the
Right.
high end the normal range is 80 to 120.
Oh, right. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. The doctor wanted to know how I even walked into the hospital. He says, you shouldn't even be, he says, you should be either in a coma or dead right now.
Well, I'm very glad you weren't, but
Yeah, me
so
too.
there was a reason why you wanted to go to the hospital.
Yeah. So, and I just was just so for no reason. I thought I need to go to the hospital, but to be in one, I was in for 5 days. I think three
Mhm.
months.
Yeah, yeah. You can quite imagine why I say that I felt a bit institutionalized. Um, and yeah, I know there's people that have to stay in for longer, and I don't know how they do it, to be perfectly frank, because it's just the same routine, the same smells, the same physiotherapy. It was and the same pain, and I just got sick of it. And
Yeah.
also the fact you get wheeled off for operations every now and then. So, because I lost count after number 27,
Oh my
uh,
goodness.
and my operations continued for another 2 years after I left hospital. So, so I think I can be forgiven for not liking hospitals very much.
I don't blame you one bit. Now let's go back to that day if that's okay.
Mhm.
We were talking before we started recording that there were a f- there was a lot more to events that led up to this horrific accident
Yeah.
that started actually probably would you say in the training department of the rail companies?
Well, it wasn't so much the training department. The main reason why our train crash happened was because the driver that was coming out from with the train from London, the hit mine, he did not stop at a red signal. He went through it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now he was a newly qualified driver. So what was said was his training sufficient enough? But other questions came up, such as where the signal was on the gantry that he saw. It was a really bright sunny morning, and it could have been that the sun obscured the fact it was a red light. There was a rather nasty attempt by the powers that be to say that he had done it deliberately because he was trying to commit suicide, which was later disproven. It wasn't what he was trying to do. Um, and then once, because I set up a campaign group afterwards, because I'm one of these people that I need to find out why something happened. I set up this survivors group, which was really there to start off with as a support group for ourselves, the people
Right.
that had been on the train. But we got quite big. There was 81 survivors in this group, and I was the chairwoman, and they kept on saying to me, well, apart from support, can we find out what happened? It then later transpired that the government of this country had, like most governments, had been pulling back on finances. So they'd allowed safety to be dictated to by how much they could afford, and they always went for the
Mm-hmm.
cheapest. And when things went wrong, it would either get delayed to be replaced and stuff like that. So lots and lots of factors came into play. And I think the thing that made us most angry as a group was when we managed to get hold of an email that was between government departments where they'd worked out it was cheaper to pay compensation to people involved in a massive train crash than it was to put what was wrong on the railways right. And I mean, I remember just being furious at the time because they were playing with people's lives and they were doing it all in the name of profit. And that's when I felt, right, that's not right. And again, sometimes I think there are things that face us in life where this sense of justice comes forward, and you realize that if you don't stand up and say something, um, then nothing's going to change. So I stood up and said something, and apparently, for about 5 years after the train crash, the rail industry and the government got rather fed up of me and my little group. But I've always, this is the one thing I will go to my grave when I face my death the second time, really proud of, is that they had a big inquiry, and there were loads and loads of recommendations made by this independent judge as to what the government should do to put the railways back to, safe limits. And we kept on nagging and pushing and just being an irritant. And after 5 years, we saw through 97% of all those recommendations. So, yeah, there were 3% that they didn't go through with, but they tended to be more cosmetic. So I can honestly say, because now the British rail system always boasts that it's one of the safest in Europe, which it is. But I like to think maybe I had a tiny part to play in that.
I would say it's more than a tiny part. It sounds like you were driving the train, so to speak.
I have driven a train. They're getting very technical these days.
You were seriously out in the front of this battle. I mean, that's...
Well, it annoys me. Again, it's just moving away from the train. It annoys me sometimes when I don't like it if somebody says to me, this is the way it has to be. And then if I say, well, why? And they can give me a sensible reason, fine, you've got me on board, I'm behind you. If I ask why, and they just go, well, that's just because it's the way it is, that always reminds me of my parent just going, because I told you so. And I find that really annoying. And that's when I start saying, right, I'm going to stand up to this, or I'm going to keep questioning it. And I think if more people did that, maybe we'd all be a bit happier.
Yeah, so the burr under the saddle.
Yes, it is. Yes, good reference to your rodeo days.
So now looking back on this and everything that you accomplished with your group and pushing for rail safety.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel right now with everything that's happened, all the changes that have been made?
I'm proud. I'm proud when I look back of what we managed to achieve. And I do say we, because all of us went for it. We
Right.
really did. Wouldn't have been possible with just me standing there. The only thing that worries me is over time, complacency can set in, because obviously generations move on, then a new generation comes in, and memory fades, doesn't it? It's part of the natural process. So now I sort of more focus on trying to ensure that the complacency doesn't set in, and I no longer do it in the public eye, but I'm actually part of the a national group, which is the Rail Safety Committee. So I get to help the industry, or the leaders in the rail industry, just remember that they can't take shortcuts with people's safety, nor should they.
Right.
So if there are proposals going through which would save a bit of money, but it compromises safety, then I'm the one that's sat there going, well, hang on a sec, you know what happens. So I just sort of bring it back again. So they probably still dislike me, don't they, at the
moment? And this was not the first accident like this. It was like just a little over 2 years before there was a similar event, was there not?
Southall, and 2 years before that there'd been Clapham. And each time, see, this is why I went into campaign mode, because each time those happened, same thing as ours, they had an inquiry, but the difference with those were that there was nobody there that held the government to account. So as far as I know, those inquiries got put on a shelf somewhere and got dusty, and then the next one would happen, and then the next one. But remember, I've already said to you, we saw a memo where the actuaries had worked out it was cheaper to pay compensation. So that's why, however ill I was, however many operations I was facing, and to be honest, to the detriment of my own health, that's why I kept the campaign going for 5 years, until I was happy that big changes had happened, and it wouldn't, a repetition, nothing can be 100% safe. There's nothing in life that is. but I was trying to ensure that a train crash like ours could never happen again.
Right.
Or if a train crash does happen, it should be more survivable. So yeah, that's always going on in the background of my head anyway.
Now, so with that event, you got to be out in the forefront of all this. I'm guessing that you have learned a lot about the rail industry.
Oh my God. That industry, I don't know whether the American industry is like it as well. The acronyms. Oh my God. I have a huge book of just all these acronyms with the explanation of what they are beside it. I've become a lay rail engineer. I'm not a train spotter, but I do know quite a lot about safety systems on rolling stock. But and what got me when I was reading through some of these acronyms, particularly when I'm in the safety committee meeting and I'm flicking through trying to work out what they're talking about, some of the acronyms, you get the same one, but it means something else. How does that work?
Well, I think every industry has something like that. In the aviation industry, there's so many acronyms: VOR, ILS, NDB, on and on and on and on. It's like, and then what always got me when I was flying is I can't remember how long ago it was, but everybody started using acronyms. You know, if it was a TV show or something, had 3 letters in it, they dropped the full name and just went to the 3 letters. What does that mean?
Well, mind you, I mean, I suppose that's what happens on social media. I
Yeah.
suppose all the shortened down words, that in a way is an acronym. So yeah, I don't know but yes, I have become, I wouldn't say an expert, and I'm certainly not an engineer, but I've had to learn if you want to make a difference with anything, particularly with an industry that's very set in their ways, you have to talk the same language. So therefore,
Right.
it becomes important that you take the time to research and learn as much as you can, so that you at least sound like you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, people just won't listen to you.
Now, we met each other through podmatch.com, which, has podcasts as well as guests and pairs people up. And I'm so glad that we got paired up. But you do more than just being a guest on podcasts, don't you? You've been out there very vocally in many ways, haven't you?
Yeah, I was. I accidentally fell into professional speaking once I recovered, because I tried several things. As I told you, it took me 10 years to fully recover.
Mm-hmm.
By then, my previous career, I was a financial advisor beforehand. That was gone, and I was trying to find an occupation that could cope with my health, because I can no longer work full time every single day of the week. It's too much for my body and my mental health, for that matter.
Right.
So I was trying all these things. So for a little while, I became an event manager, which in my head, I thought I can be really, really busy, then have a rest after an event. Well, it just doesn't work that way. You run yourself ragged running these events. So I thought, okay, I don't really enjoy that. And then I became a project manager, thinking the same thing. But it was while I was a project manager, because I'd been in the public eye after the train crash,
Mm-hmm.
I'd always been asked to stand up and speak at various conferences I was invited to, and I was doing that for free. I didn't realise there was a speaking circuit. And I was at one gig, and a guy came up to me and he said, have you ever thought about becoming a professional speaker? And I went, no. And he was one. So he said, yeah, you get paid. I went, really? Said, if you're any good, yes. And he said, you are good. I think you should. So I then joined the Professional Speaking Association, which is part of, I think over in your neck of the woods, It's the Global Speakers Federation. It's part of that.
Okay.
So I joined that and sort of did an apprenticeship for 18 months where I honed my skills. I learnt my stagecraft. I learnt how to design and deliver a talk in such a way that it's not preaching and it's not telling people what to do, but at the same time it's entertaining, but it's always got the audience in mind, because why would you stand up and speak just to hear your voice drone on?
Right.
That type of thing. And I think a lot of speakers do forget that. It's not about them, it's about the audience. And what can we give the audience that they can then use in their own lives? That's the most important thing about speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And with you, what would you say that you offer the audience?
I think because of what happened in those seconds while the train crash was happening, because my life got so profoundly changed and I came out with a totally different view on life and how to achieve things. There's not much that gets to me now. So when I hit another problem, a normal problem, which could be, I don't know, my mortgage has gone totally wrong, or all of these little life problems, rather than getting phased by it now, I immediately switch back into how I was when I was recovering. So there's a lot of things that I try to tell audiences that I learned that I still use in everyday life, that they should feel profoundly, because then it makes any change, much easier. And once you find change in your life easy, it then actually becomes quite exciting. And I am a self-confessed change junkie now. If my life gets too boring, I actually throw a grenade in my life just to see what's going to happen. But in normal life, I try to inspire people, if you like, to profoundly change deep inside themselves, to know that they are powerful enough to overcome absolutely anything that life may throw at them.
Yeah, it's one thing I was so excited about having you on my podcast was because of what you've been through and the message that you're taking forward. And you notice I've got another streamer down there at the bottom, says qprinstitute.com. That's a place that helps people learn about how to deal with someone who is having suicidal thoughts.
Right.
Yeah, QPR is question, persuade, refer. You question somebody to find out what's going on, and then persuade them to get help, and then refer them to somebody. But the reason I bring that up, in this study, while I was going through this, went through a training program for it. It takes an hour, $30 to go to this website. For $30, you can take an hour-long course that can teach you how to deal with somebody who's in crisis mode. But in this course, one of the things that was mentioned is that anyone who has ever thought of ending their life or has attempted to but failed, or most likely everyone who has actually succeeded in that attempt, all have one thing in common, is they have no hope for the future. Yeah. Like somebody loses a job and they have no hope of finding another one, or whatever the situation it is, there's just no hope there. And
yeah, I think what we all tend to lose sight, because we are human, and I don't think we allow ourselves our frailties. We're very much brought up and conditioned that we should be battling all the time, and we shouldn't give in to our weaknesses. To a certain point, I understand that, because sometimes when you give in to a weakness, it can take you too far down the wrong path. But I do think we shut or we try and shut all our frailties out. But if we actually sit down and we give time and room for it, I think that's a healthy thing. I mean, there are times even now when life gets on top of me, and I will actually walk away from my office, and I call it wailing like a banshee. I actually deliberately make myself cry, and whether that be watching sad nature program, anything that's going to make me cry, I physically make myself cry, and then I will sit down on the floor and I will wail, and it's just to get it out. And I think that is what makes you more resilient and healthy, in my opinion, is making that time for it.
You know, we all have our ways of coping with the pains of this life. You know, that's one of your mechanisms. Mine, after losing my granddaughter,
Hmm.
is starting this podcast, being a guest on podcasts, and putting together a public speaking format where I can go out and talk about suicide awareness and mental health. And that has helped me immensely. And you are such an inspiration because you are the epitome of hope and change. when you're,
Right. I mean, it's not something that I wouldn't say I strive to do that, but I want people, because every year goes past, and however, to use a British expression, however crappy it gets, something always comes out good, and I'm getting much quicker at spotting the positive side very quickly,
right.
which then means I can move on from the negative bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not quite becoming water off a duck's back yet, another British expression, but it's becoming easy, and life's getting more fun. And I've actually described it as my life's getting more and more technicolor. The older I'm getting, the more colors are appearing in my life. But I want everyone to experience that. So if there's a way I can help by talking to them and thinking about them, and in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, because modern day life is getting so fast and furious and everything's online, and it's the pressure, the mental illness and the suicidal thoughts, I think, will become even more commonplace than they are now. And unless everyone can find an outlet or be
Mm-hmm.
brave enough to ask for that help, I so agree with you with your QPR, in that getting help is nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
And I really wish that stigma would drop away. I've had a psychologist now for getting on for 18 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I still use him. I still find that when the pressure gets too much, he's a really good sounding board to then work out how am
Sure.
I going to get around this. But people still have this, oh, I don't want to take antidepressants, which if you are seriously depressed, then maybe you should, but always view it very much as a plaster. It's a temporary thing. But in the meantime, you should get the psychological help from the professional. And I'm
Absolutely.
asking for that help is a bad thing.
Yeah. There's still such a stigma
Yeah.
around mental health
Yeah.
or mental illness that you went through the PTSD and all the physical pain that you went through. Now, you were dubbed the woman behind the mask or something like that.
I'm called the lady in the mask. It's
The
because I
lady
had
in the mask.
a mask. Yeah.
Tell us about that if you could, please.
Yeah, of course. I should have got it out before I started talking to you. I've still got my, it's like an old friend. It really is. Because I lost because I had full thickness burns, which means all your skin's gone. And basically my face from here up, no skin. So they had to take skin from other bits of my body. And luckily I was in the coma. And they grafted it to my face. So this is grafted skin. But the plastic surgeon, I'm so glad I had him. He didn't want that. It's called hypertrophic scarring. It's that ugly scarring that bubbles up.
Mm-hmm.
when your body's healing, it just doesn't know when to stop healing. So he came up, or he got me to wear a Perspex mask, and it was very rigid, clear plastic. And they molded it to my face. And the idea behind it was applying pressure to the grafts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It would get very hot and humid underneath there, which helped the skin knit
Okay.
without up with this scarring. And I had to wear it for 2 years. And I was supposed to wear it for 23 hours a day. But to be honest, I just thought to myself, well, what's the point of taking off an hour? So I just left it. And I'm so pleased that I actually listened to the doctors, because I'm very happy with this face. It's not the one I was used to for 32 years before the train crash, but it's passable. I do have to wear camouflage makeup because not that I've got big rigid scarring, but I do still have scars. But this will make you laugh. What I've been told is grafted skin doesn't wrinkle. So the older I get, this is going to stay smooth. But because I put my hands over my eyes, which saved my sight, thank God, this is my original skin around here. So I'm going to end up looking like a tortoise. I'm going to be all smooth and then have these wrinkly bits down here and down here. So I'm going to, honestly, in about 20 years, I'm going to look like a tortoise or a terrapin. It's going to be quite interesting.
Oh my! And you have a book out that is named after the woman in the
Yeah,
mask.
no, I call it From Behind the Mask.
From
Um,
behind the mask. Okay, yeah.
yeah, because I'm sort of stepping out from behind the mask and revealing all.
And what does that book go about, the accident and your healing process?
It's more, well, it's a mixture. It's an autobiography. So it does talk about my childhood and my background.
Okay.
Um, but I sort of, when I wrote it, I don't do it in like, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's more, I chop and change. So it starts off with the train crash, but then flash back to
Oh,
childhood
okay.
to explain who I was before that caught the train, type of thing. And then it moves on into the political battles. And I mean, I'm hoping where I've written about my campaign and how I had to deal with politicians and work out how to get around them, and then deal with the rail industry and how to talk to them. I'm hoping that should anybody be forced to set up their own campaign for anything, it might give them a few tips on what's that old expression? How to skin a cat?
Yes. have, have you ever thought about going into politics yourself?
I've been asked, and I just went no,
No.
no. Um, to be honest, Colin, I'm looking at the politicians, and I'm just going, why would anyone want that? Just that, just oh, honestly, words fail me. They absolutely fail me. And I'm sort of sat there going, no, I'm a different class of person to that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Politics these days. I mean, it's like here in the States, we have an election, and all I can think is, out of all the millions of people in our country, this is the best two we can have.
Exactly. It's the same over here. It's the same over here. And that's why I've got absolutely no respect for any politician across the world. It's just, I'm sort of sat there going, when we all went through COVID, I was one of these optimistic people that was thinking, yay, we're learning how to get along and look at life differently and be nicer to each other. We come out, and within the year, all the politicians are back to doing exactly what they were doing before.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. It's
Crazy.
weird.
It's very crazy.
But your story to me is miraculous.
Oh, thank you.
You were, that's why I thought, oh, you're perfect you fit under the title and the theme of my podcast, The Miracles of Tragedy. You lived through this horrific, tragic event,
Hmm.
and you've gone on to change the rail industry in the UK to be safer. And there's, with the help of others, as you said, so I'll give them a little bit of credit for them. But without your leadership, that probably might not have happened, because you just really grabbed the bull by the horns and you went after it, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's that personal sense of justice. It's that I don't like people telling me what to do. It's probably why I keep divorcing husbands. I don't like people telling me what to do unless they can justify the reasoning behind
Right.
why they're asking me to do it. Then I'm happy.
And now, along with that, you've done all that,
Mhm.
and you're public speaking, inspiring people.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a major rail accident in the UK since then, has there?
There haven't been two trains hitting each other, but there have been incidents. Most of them were soon after hours, which were probably down to the industry still trying to catch up with the recommendations, and we were still campaigning. There have been incidents ever since then, but they've tended to be things like landslips. Well, yes, did maintenance make sure that the land was properly maintained? It's very difficult. But I always said, there were two things I said when I set up the campaign group. One was the success of the group, to me, would be proven once it was no longer needed. I was always very clear about that. But also I pointed out nothing, including the rails, can be 100% safe. Something will always happen. But that doesn't mean we don't strive towards 100% safe. It's just we'll never achieve it.
Right.
But we should always be aiming for it so that we keep implementing the highest standards possible.
Absolutely. And once again, you're such an example of living through adversity. 3 months in the hospital, for a while, it was like you almost lost hope that you were ever going to go home.
Yeah.
And so, but you found a way to do that. You found a way to, I want to go home. I can do this. And you push through it. You push through the pain. You push through the doctors.
Yeah.
Get out of my way. And this recovery has not been easy for you. I mean, you are the example of courage
I'm
and
not.
strength.
Well, I don't know how far you read into my background, but 2 years after the train crash, I tried to commit suicide.
But you didn't.
No, when I look back, I think for me, it was more cry for help. I hadn't learned back then that you could ask for help. Plus, my post-traumatic stress had not been diagnosed at that time. So I had no way of knowing what was wrong, apart from something. And I was self-medicating with alcohol at the time, which doesn't help, does it?
Yeah.
But it was after that suicide attempt that I then got the psychological help that I desperately needed from the professionals. Right. And it was they that helped build me up again. But when I look back to that time and how low and desperate I did get, I then look to now, or even recent years, where I've been having all this fun. And two things strike me. One is that I still get these episodes of depression, huge depression, which will knock me out for a week. And it means I can't move, I can't talk, I can barely eat. But to me, I now get it for a week, but it only happens twice a year. So when I was talking to my family about it, I said, well, okay, I can live with that because that's 2 weeks in a year. That gives me 50 weeks when I'm absolutely fine and I can be rushing around and enjoying myself. that to me is a fair trade-off. So
Right.
I'm always sort of balancing all the time about, okay, yeah, that's what I was saying to you about things being a bit crappy and
Yeah.
but enjoying the good bits. But the other thing is I can honestly now turn round, which is what I say in the book, and I'm not negating the train crash should never have happened. It should never have killed those people. It should never have made all of us suffer what we did. But now I can look back and say that train crash is the best thing to have ever happened to me.
Wow.
Because it has completely altered my life, my outlook, my enjoyment. And yeah, I just find everything brilliantly exciting. And I love meeting people such as yourself because I just enjoy being able to talk about it.
Now, with your public speaking, you've been out there for how long doing speaking engagements?
2014 was when I started.
Okay.
uh,
And throughout that time, you're probably addressing some pretty decent sized crowds. How many people total of all your speaking events do you believe that you have addressed?
what that's made a difference? Do you mean?
No, just that we're at these speaking engagements of yours, that we're in the audience and have heard you.
How many people? Well, I know the biggest one was 5,000.
Okay.
That was a proper arena thing. But then I've spoken to Chamber of Commerce type places where there's been about 20 people. So I don't mind how big or small they are.
Yeah.
I think
asked because I'm asked. Well, I'll just move forward with it and let you know what I'm saying. Because with everything you've been through and your public speaking, you have probably touched tens of thousands of people's lives in a positive way. If you all you're speaking, and well, if you talk about being a podcast guest, I would say you've probably touched millions of lives.
Oh, well, I think, yeah, probably an exaggeration. I'll
I
tell you
don't.
what, to me, that's not when this is why COVID really knocked me for six, as in I went virtual, but I didn't enjoy it because I couldn't connect with
Right.
the audience. I much prefer because every single engagement I've done, I look in people's eyes when I'm talking to them
Exactly.
to get, well, because you do it, don't you? So
Yeah.
you get the energy and you get the feeling, and it helps you as a speaker as well.
Yeah.
But it's that spark that goes in their eyes. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? That
Absolutely.
recognition. And that's when you go,
Absolutely.
that's what I'm up here for. That is perfect. That person will go away and they are going to do something phenomenal with their life. They are going to make difference for other people, or they're going to do something great. But you just see that click, don't you?
And that, to me, that's what you're all about. So in summation, let me summarize here is that, you before the accident, you were going through your daily life, just doing your financial job, and then this event happens.
Yeah.
That you almost died in.
Yeah.
Months in the hospital, surgery after surgery after surgery after surgery, deep depression, PTSD.
Yeah.
And you kept pushing forward. You kept going. So you've had the tragedy, and now that miracle's kicking in as you find yourself being stronger and stronger and getting through all this, and now going out there and inspiring people.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
It's a gift, isn't it? It really is a gift.
That is such a beautiful thing, and I'm so glad that you came on my podcast with me. I've been telling my wife almost every day. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Really? Yeah. She did that. Yeah. And
Well,
so she's gonna have to listen to this one for
can I
sure.
reciprocate and say I got all excited because I was going to be talking to a rodeo star. We don't get that in Britain whatsoever. I love the idea of a rodeo star. Bucking broncos. Wow.
Well, if you get to the States and you can look me up, I'll see that I can get you into a rodeo.
I've never seen one live. I've only seen it on the TV.
Oh, well, you're in for a treat then. I'll see what I can cook up for you.
All right, I will definitely take you up on that, Colin.
Pam, once again, thank you so much for being on my podcast, The Miracles of Tragedy. And
My
folks,
pleasure.
thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to future episodes of The Miracles of Tragedy.